So what I thought would be a fun way of learning just the basics of object modeling in Blender is to create this cake scene here. So what I'll do is start with this little guy down here, and then I'll expand my way up to this guy up here. Maybe I'll change the name to Exo instead of Noah. All right, so the first thing you want to do whenever you're thinking about object modeling or whatever is you want to look at what is the simplest and most dominant shapes in this scene. And then how can I, for rapid prototyping, duplicate it? So you'll notice there's a cylinder here. This is made of a cylinder. Both of these are cylinders. This is made of a bunch of boxes. So we want to kind of gray box out this before we even begin. And then on top of it, what's pretty cool is we can actually reuse these again here and here and here, and we can use the base of this truck to essentially manufacture all of these guys. So let's get started. Back in here, what I'm going to do is just delete out my light and camera just to clean up my scene. And then with this default cube, now for me, one of the biggest issues I have is I don't like, so you're going to see this a lot, and this is a personal preference that I got from working and currently work with game studios, is this. I don't like to use the UV sphere, and the reason for that is because it has triangles at the top. So I never make any of my cylinders or my spheres out of the default props that are in the scene. Now sometimes you can get away with it with the cylinder because if you're just using the side of it, but again, what this does is even though you don't see it, it terminates all of these verts to one central point. It's not creating clean lines across. So then you're asking, well, if you're not using that, how are you creating cylinders and stuff? Well, what I do is I select this guy. Let's go to our modifiers panel. So I'm going to hit tab. Here's another thing I like to do. If you go to edit and then you go to preferences here, what I like to turn on is if you go to key mapping, I like to use the what's it called? The tab for pie menu. So you want to make sure that's checked on. And so now when you press tab with the object selected, you'll get the pie menu, which mine doesn't seem to be. Let's see, hit escape here. Let's make sure this is selected. There we go. Now it pops up. Mine wasn't actually selected. All right, so let's go ahead and go to edit mode. And you can see we have our modifier panel here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a subdivision surface here. So I'm going to click on that, and you'll see now I have a sphere, which is pretty cool. But what I'd really like is that cylinder shape. Well, if you hit Control R and you scroll your wheel up, you'll notice we now have an edge loop tool. Now, if I click my left mouse in and I move my mouse up, you'll notice it starts to flatten out the top of that sphere and starts to look more cylindrical. Let's do that again down here. So just positioning down here, I'm going to hit Control R. Left click to lock that in, I'm going to pull it down, and now I have a cylinder. And what's really powerful about this is it is a completely quadded cylinder. Like there's actually invisible loops going straight across, and it's the same on the bottom. Now if I pop my viewport render up to 2, what you'll notice is now I have a much more a much smoother cylinder. And this actually creates a nicer looking or quality cylinder than just using it because it automatically gives us that nice round off that we're looking for around these edges. Now for all of the detailing of the icing and stuff, we're going to be doing that anyway later, but for now this is giving me a nice shape. Next thing I want to do is just hitting 1 to go to vertex mode. I'm going to highlight all of these. Now here's the issue. Notice it didn't grab this guy back here. If I go to my toggle x-ray mode, now I can select all of them. I can hit S to scale, and I can scale that out. And I'm going to grab the top of my cake here. I'm going to hit G and then Z to move it down on that top axis. So that's looking pretty good. Let's practice all of that again by creating the little mat that's going to sit on top of this thing. So I'm going to hit tab and go to object mode, and I'm just going to move this up above my grid. And if you press 1 on your keyboard, you can see we're now in move mode. Or I'm sorry, we're now in front view. And just below this, I want to create another cube. So I'm just going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to go to mesh, and I'm going to hit cube. And what I'm going to do is add that same exact subdivision surface modifier. And then within this, I'm going to go ahead and go to my edit mode. So now you can see here's our box. Control R, click. Sorry, Control R, click, and then I'm going to move that up. Control R, click, and I'm going to move that down. And then, oops, let's undo that. Control R, and then, come on, buddy. There we go. Now, SZ, scaling up. Let's go to this view so you can see that a little bit better. Let's go scale and Z. Now, it's not working because it's scaling those verts. Actually, you know what? That might be kind of cool. Let's go ahead and grab these, hit G and then Z, and then just move that up. Grab these guys, G and then Z, and then move that down. Now, back in object mode, so I'm hitting tab, going to object mode. I'm going to hit S, and I'm going to scale this up. Now, I can increase the viewport size and all this, you know, or I'm sorry, the viewport, here we go, 2 to make it a little bit smoother. And if we look at our reference, you can see that's roughly the shape that we want. This one's going to be a lot more fun to create the little circles around it. Now, in respect to this object here, we want to site size it. That's something I actually took away from drawing. And we're just going to create one cube and place it as a representation of this. We're not going to model it on top of the cake. We're actually going to model it off to the side. But I just want to have a representational cube of how big I want this. And then I will duplicate that cube and use that as the scaling area for my truck. So let's go ahead and do that. So Shift A, grab a cube. Just going to move it up. Scale it down by hitting S. Bring it down this way. And I'm going to assume that, you know, this cake is actually rotated straight on. So like that. So scaling that down some more, moving it this way. S and X to kind of play with the width a little bit. I'm going to make it narrow. S and Y to increase the depth of that. And then I'm just going to move it forward. Let's turn off our guy here. Looks pretty good. I like that. What might be cool is if we jump around a little bit. Now, you normally want to model the entire scene and make sure that you're okay before you do this, but it's really more for the fun of the tutorial that maybe we'll unwrap the cake and start doing some basic texturing in the next video.